Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Immaculate Heart of Mary. First concert in a long time that we've actually been able to have folks live. Wonderful to be able to do that. We're very happy to do that. We'd also like to welcome all of our folks that are live streaming at home. I'm Tom Bozak, Director of Music and Liturgy here. I'm honored today to be able to present this piano concert to you. Phenomenal. You will be very much impressed. Aren't able to be here live and hear this live. No substitute for experiencing. Just a couple of quick things. When we leave today, we ask you to please let the folks in the back leave first. So kind of back to front. And just keep the 6 feet social distancing as you leave the church today. We ask you please to just remain seated. There is one restroom in the back if you need for an emergency use. But it's probably best for everyone. We'll only be about an hour, so we should be good to go. We thank you. I saw lots of folks coming in supporting our concert. And we really appreciate that. Because that's the only way we can keep everything going. We don't receive any outside funding, any funding from the parish. This is totally thanks to your generosity that we're able to continue all of these things. And I would also mention to all the folks that are watching at home through the live stream, there are lots of opportunities that you have. Log on to the IHM website. You can go right to the music series, online giving. If you're not comfortable with online giving, we have a drop box at the back of the rectory off of the Joan Avenue side. It's very secure. You can just pull up, put it in an envelope, mark concert series. And we know times are tough for everyone, so we're happy to be able to present these things. We do need your support. Even if it's only a few dollars, every bit helps. Continue on. Also mention that on November 8th, we have another wonderful piano and violin. Rehearsing the other day. Wonderful in the church. So if you can come and hear it live, it's just absolutely phenomenal sounding. Appreciate that very much. So I think without further ado, we are set and ready to go. So I'd like to introduce Micheal Angelucci.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here at the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Very much want to thank Tom and all the clergy and staff here for inviting me here to play today. First live recital in 7 months. Boy, it's been a long time. And of course, yes, right, let's applause for things coming back. And of course, I want to thank all of you that are here today and those of you that are tuning in on live stream to hear today's program. As part of my performance and presentation, I'd like to say a few words about each of the pieces that I'm playing. Starting with the first piece that I just played was a sonata by Scarlatti, the F minor sonata by Scarlatti. Scarlatti actually wrote 555 of these sonatas. I don't know how he ended up with that number. It's an interesting number. Should probably play the lottery with those 3 numbers there. But in any case, most of them are like the piece that you just heard, which is to say they're 2-part or binary pieces with each section that repeats. He wrote a few pieces that were, fugues or different types of forms, but most of them were binary 2-part pieces like the one I played. Scarlatti is an Italian composer, but in fact lived most of his life in Spain. So a lot of his music has a lot of Spanish flavor and color and nuance to it. The piece that I played just now is sometimes called the fandango. And I think it's because of that rhythm that you heard in the left hand, da-da-da-bum-bum. You can almost kind of hear the castanets just clicking away in the background. It's a very, very cool effect. So, and I thought it would be a fun way to start the program. So a little bit of Scarlatti for you there. The next piece that I'm going to play is the Sonata in A major, D664 of Franz Schubert. So we're moving a little bit from Spain and Italy back to Germany. Schubert wrote this particular sonata in the summer of 1819, and it was at a time when he was sort of vacationing, but like a lot of composers, he gained a lot of inspiration and insight from his time away from regular composing or performing activities. And this piece really does have a very summery feel to it. It's a 3-movement work, a little bit shorter than a lot of his later sonatas, which were in the 4-movement model. And the first 2 movements are quite pastoral and relaxed overall. First movement is marked Allegro moderato. So it is an allegro, but it is a relaxed allegro. And all the way through, there's just sort of this wonderful kind of pastoral, relaxed, and refreshed quality to it. There is a big kind of middle section that happens partway through the piece, but then that lovely sort of gentle nuance returns. I'm curious, how many of you are familiar with Beethoven's 7th Symphony? Couple hands. Okay. All right. The reason I say that is that the second theme of the first movement of this particular Schubert sonata is based somewhat on the rhythmic motive of that symphony. That's a theme that Schubert turned to quite frequently, actually, in a number of his compositions. So that sort of makes the basis for the second theme of that first movement. And that's paired with Schubert's signature triplets. He just loved triplets, and a lot of his sonatas and many of his songs and many other chamber works, triplets were sort of like his thing. So it's nice to see that it doesn't start that way, but then right away he goes to his sort of his go-to rhythm. Then the second movement is just marked andante, very relaxed, very sort of straightforward, and yet again has this big sort of kind of build-up in the middle, which is another Schubert trait. Sort of like Beethoven, Schubert tended to have, on occasion, would have like kind of big explosions that would occur partway through the piece, even if it was very relaxed. So it's even though the piece is a little bit shorter, he still is adopting some of those more intense, more sort of forward-thinking kind of ideas. And then the third movement is marked allegro, and it's by contrast, is actually quite virtuosic. It's full of cascading scales and arpeggios up and down the keyboard, big leaps, things that are, some things are kind of deceptively difficult. But yet it still has that wonderful sort of summery and kind of lighthearted feel to it, which really makes it a nice capstone for the sonata. The only other thing I would mention about this particular piece, it's interesting to note that Schubert actually wrote double repeats in the first and third movements, where the first section and then the entire second section are supposed to be repeated. for my taste, it's a little bit long, so I'm probably not going to take all those repeats. If I hear a lot of coughing, that's probably the cue to kind of move her along. So, but I might take 1 or 2 of the repeats, all right? So altogether, the sonata is probably between 18 and 20 minutes. So it's a nice kind of fall day. If you like fall, this is a good day for you. I'm more of a summer person, so I'm going to try to channel some of that summer warmth. So without further ado, this is Schubert, Sonata in A major. All right, so we're roughly halfway or so through the program. Just curious if anyone who's here in the audience has any questions so far about the pieces or the performance. If you'd like to stand up and ask them, and then I'll repeat them so people at home can hear, or just pull your mask down and shout loudly. Yes? Well, pianists yeah, I mean, they usually play from memory if everything goes well. Let's hope it stays there. Most of it is there, I think. So, yeah, that's fairly common. This is a little more challenging today just because a lot of these pieces are new works. I've never played them before, like that Schubert Sonata, for example. So that's kind of interesting when you have a new piece and throw it out there. Yes, Father.
What do you find most challenging about playing a piece like that?
For me, it's always the first time, I think, is always the hardest, because you haven't really made friends with the piece 100% of the way. It takes a couple times before you can kind of shake out sort of what went wrong and, sort of what you'd like to do differently or things you feel that you can improve upon. And of course, because the composers are so different from one another, playing a Schubert Sonata is not like playing Mozart or Beethoven or, any of the others. There's relationships there, sure. But then sort of identifying sort of what makes Schubert Schubert and trying to really kind of capture that in your own performances, regardless of the composer, is always a challenge. Today, I think the hardest thing was just, do I know this piece well enough to actually come and play it for people? So that's always kind of an interesting experience. But other questions? Yes?
So to follow up, what makes Schubert Schubert?
That's a great question. I think I'd have to say first and foremost, the question was, I should repeat this, the question was, what makes Schubert Schubert? And I would have to say certainly his sort of allegiance to song-like textures, things being very vocally inspired. Of course, any singers who are here will know that, Schubert Lieder, you better sing those if you call yourself a singer, and it's that sort of quality, that just amazing vocal quality he's able to sort of track right into his instrumental music. Not all composers can do that so fluidly and so beautifully as Schubert. And I think certainly that piece that I just played certainly does that. And so many of his keyboard works, if not all of his keyboard works, I think you could say that's certainly a hallmark. So for me, I guess just to kind of piggyback on your first question was, sort of what are the challenges of playing a piece like that? Would be maybe to go back, listen to this recording and think, okay, am I really capturing that spirit? And besides, notes or, all the sort of functional technical stuff, but sort of a little bit beyond that, but thinking, does this really sound like Schubert? If not, then I need to make some changes. So, great questions. Yes, sir. That's a great question. So the question was about the Scarlatti sounded a little bit like Bach, and that's because they're musical contemporaries, really writing in the same era, the Baroque era. Bach, of course, wrote a ton of keyboard music. So did Handel. So did Scarlatti. Other composers as well. So there is a relationship there. Just stylistically, it's probably what your ear is gravitating towards. Bach didn't write sonatas. He wrote, of course, the preludes and fugues, but standalone works like toccatas, and then a lot of multi-movement works, suites, the partitas, works such of those natures. So a lot of those movements are two parts as well. So there's definitely a relationship. Composers are kind of feeding into one another. Great question. These are great questions. This is a musical group. Yes, in the back. Okay, so the question was, were there quotes from Panis Angelucci and Ave Maria? I assume you're talking about the Schubert. Yeah. And then the second part of the question was, do composers tend to put quotes from other pieces or other composers in there? And the short answer would be no and yes. So it wasn't a direct quote, but I think what you're responding to was the earlier question, the vocal nature of it. So it sounds like it could be a vocal piece. The quote actually is Beethoven's 7th Symphony. That is sort of a loose rhythmic quote. And yes, composers do that all the time. They either borrow from each other or they quote their own pieces, or if they're writing an homage to someone, there could be something stylistically that composers are referencing. For example, Debussy, in the early 20th century, writing suites that go back to like the French Baroque period, 200-300 years before that. So yes, there's a lot of crossover like that, and composers do get a lot of inspiration, even in original works, from other composers and other music. These are wonderful questions. Better than the answers, I sort of think. Any other questions? Feel free. How many hours do I practice today? Practice a day? Well, that depends on a great number of factors. Do I have anywhere to play? That will determine how much I'm practicing that day. How much am I teaching that day? If there's any other, just normal life activities that have to happen, like dishes or laundry or, all those wonderful things. It'd be nice to be able to just throw that all aside and just worry about that. But it doesn't really work that way, of course. So I would say on average, I probably, if I'm getting ready for recitals, 4 to 5 hours a day. And that's assuming that I'm not teaching a full day or that I don't have some gig or some concert or something happening. It varies. I try to get at least 3, even if I'm not, playing, because really it just takes 2.5, 3 hours a day just to keep your playing up, just to keep your chops up. Say nothing about, the fingers, so the fingers like work when you want them to work. It says nothing about learning new repertoire or polishing things for performances. I mean, that's additional hours. So, really great questions. One more before we go on, or shall we go on? We should go on. Okay, if there are questions, feel free to ask me, afterwards. All right, so the next half of the program I'm devoting to Chopin, collection of pieces. The first piece I'm going to play for you is the Impromptu number 2 in F-sharp major. Chopin wrote 4 impromptus, like he wrote 4 ballades, 4 scherzos, piece I'll talk about later on. For me, the second has always been the most captivating, the most interesting. And I think this is a number of factors. For one, it's the only one that starts slowly. All the others kind of start with a boisterous, sort of outgoing theme and then have a slower section in the middle. This one starts very much like a nocturne. And then we get out of nowhere, we get like this military march in a totally different key that just, I don't know how that happened, but it happens. And then we get an almost atonal passage of a couple measures that are just not in any key. And when we come back to the main theme, it has a totally different accompaniment, and it's in a brand new key. We've moved from F sharp major to F major. So if you were to look at a circle of fifths, I mean, tonally, those 2 keys could not be further apart. So this is sort of Chopin doing what Chopin does. He gets uber chromatic, and really can just cycle through keys that have absolutely no relationship to one another, seemingly without any kind of break. And then the theme eventually sort of resettles itself and gets back on its tonic key of F sharp. But then we get towards the end of the piece this incredible 3 pages of music where you just have running 30-second notes for about 3.5 pages straight. It's almost like this little run through the meadow that he just throws in there towards the end of the piece. It's really remarkable and kind of astonishing that he would come upon this. And then we get this very ethereal sort of secondary theme that we had heard earlier comes back and sort of cadences the piece. But overall, it's the most diverse in terms of its themes. And I think that's one of the reasons that I sort of always been attracted to it. So it was nice to have an opportunity the last few weeks to kind of sit down and actually learn this piece for the first time and play it and really kind of see what it's all about. So this is Chopin's Impromptu number 2 in F sharp. We're going to stick with Chopin, but we're going to switch gears here, move away from impromptus and over to mazurkas. So I'd have to say if Chopin's etudes were sort of like his skeleton or his muscles, and the ballades were like Chopin's heart, I would probably say that the mazurkas are Chopin's soul. These are works that Chopin would write from really his earliest days as a composer all the way through towards the end of his life. And probably more than any other composer, I think it's safe to say, Chopin really did elevate the mazurka from almost a nothing genre into something that could become very fine concert music. The three works that I'm going to play for you today are from different periods, kind of early, middle, and late. The first one, the C major mazurka, opus 24, number 2, it's very rustic. It starts with like these open fifths in both hands, primarily in the left hand, sort of sound like kind of string instruments, house fiddles, sort of tuning up, that kind of thing, has a very sort of lighthearted and graceful, rustic feel to it. The second is the G minor mazurka, opus 67, number 2. Does have an opus, but it was one of the pieces that were published after Chopin's death. Very song-like, marked simply cantabile, really a beautiful short work. And then the third one is probably one of the most famous mazurkas, the B flat major, opus 7, number 1. And this is the one that has a very kind of almost mystical middle theme that, theory teachers love to kind of have their students pore over and study because it's got all these incredible chords that seem like they don't go together, but again, it's Chopin, so of course they do. All right, so without further ado, these are three of Chopin's mazurkas: C major, opus 24, number 2, G minor, opus 67, number 2, and B flat major, opus 7, number 1. right. So I should have mentioned they're very diverse, those pieces, as you no doubt heard. So favorites from the three? I'm just curious, in case I want to program these again. 3, 3, 2, 3. Which finger are you holding up? Number 1? Oh, no. All right. Good. Okay. All right. So we like them all, but yes. Right. Good. Okay. All right. Well, we've come to the final piece then on the program. Last thing I'm going to play for you today is the Scherzo number 3 in C-sharp minor. I mentioned previously that Chopin wrote 4 scherzos. This is the one that the pianist Arthur Rubinstein famously remarked that of all the pieces in the repertory, this is the one that taxes him the most. And it's really, it's probably because of the octaves. It's basically all based on octaves. That's one of the reasons, I think. But also it's got a really fiendishly difficult coda. All 4 scherzos do. They sort of build and build and build, and then they all are capped off with really difficult codas. This one's no exception. And of course there's that famous, I think it was a movie actually that he did where he's playing the 3rd scherzo, and of course he's just sitting there, you know, like not breaking a sweat, like what a jerk. And he says this is the most difficult piece for him, but that's why we love him, because he's so great. In any case, it's certainly difficult work. All the scherzos are. This one is interesting in the sense that the middle theme is basically kind of a chorale. Chopin was not a particularly religious person, and yet on occasion we do get carols or hymns or references to that in his music. The first scherzo is one where the middle theme is based on a Polish Christmas carol, actually. This particular one, I don't believe it's an actual theme, an actual chorale or hymn tune, but it's 4-bar phrases, 4 of them. And then in between you get these little tinkly cascades that come down. It's very sort of ethereal and kind of angelic, really kind of wonderful atmosphere. I chose to sort of end the program with a big work like that simply because you can't put it anywhere else on the program. So it's, before I play the scherzo, I would just like to thank you all again for coming. It's been wonderful to have the chance to perform. Thank you to Tom and to the staff and everyone here for making this possible, inviting me to come. I hope you've enjoyed it, especially for those who are also watching from home or wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in. Please remember to contribute to the series if you can. We can't have artists playing concerts in venues if we don't have support for those artists and concerts and venues. So if you could, think of contributing if you haven't already, it would be much appreciated, and make sure that this wonderful series keeps going. So thank you again for coming. It's been my absolute pleasure to perform for you today, and I will conclude today's recital with Chopin Scherzo number 3. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for who are watching. I don't know if we're allowed to congregate. Are we allowed to? Oh, I not. What if I go outside? Okay, so I'll step outside. Yes, if anyone would like to chat with mask on afterwards, if you have more questions, I'd be happy to greet you and meet you at least from the mask up. So, thank you.